On the eve of his crucifixion, Jesus prays to his Father, I have given them your word, and the world hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them from the world, but you keep them from the evil one. Hey everyone, welcome back to Aliens on Earth, Season 2, Episode 25. You're listening to our series Discovering Jesus in the Old Testament. I'm your host, Nate Gazal, and first of all, I'd just like to say welcome. For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, welcome to the podcast. Listen to some of the other episodes that we've released prior. Join us in the journey as we discover Jesus in the Old Testament. So, just a recap of last week, we focused on the unyielding sovereignty that was found in the book of Daniel. We discovered Christ as the pattern of this perfect obedience who grants us a Daniel type of resolve against this social conformity trap. We also saw Christ as the crushing rock who shatters all these political anxieties centered on his eternal kingdom. And we saw Christ as the fourth man in the fire who enables that but if not type of faith, providing his presence against conditional faith. Daniel gave us this promise of a king who overcomes all these external systems. Today, we're going to kind of jump from that and go into the internal relational mess of sin, Hosea. God tells his prophet to marry Gomer, a prostitute, and to endure her infidelity, all to dramatize God's covenant love for Israel, who he calls my wife. This is a scandal of this redemptive kind of love. So grab your notes, get your coffee, and let's dive into our search for Christ in the book of Hosea. Hey guys, real quick, before we jump in, if you've been blessed by this podcast or find it impactful, I'd like you to hit the follow button. Be a partaker of spreading God's truth by sharing this with your friends, coworkers, family, or even strangers. Let's spread the truth of Christ together. Now, back to this episode. So, God commands Hosea to enter into this devastating marriage. And it's interesting because a lot of times when we think of marriages in our context, we think of the perfect man or the perfect woman or just that perfect person who we see that will complete us. So we go through this sort of checklist and this sort of, set of demands that we have in the back of our minds or in our hearts that we say, you know what? If this person checks these boxes, if they meet these requirements, if they have this type of personality, this height, this build, and we envision someone who is perfect in a sense. And it's funny because this story kind of is the opposite of that. And we see God tells Hosea, he says, go take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. And this is Hosea 1 verse 2. And this is interesting because Hosea's broken family became a living, agonizing sermon illustrating Israel's constant spiritual infidelity, their worship of fertility gods like Baal and reliance on foreign powers. And Hosea's personal pain gave him a sort of authority to speak this message. You hear in Hosea chapter 2 verse 5, he says, for their mother has played the whore. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. For he said, I will go after her lovers, who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. The truth here is sin is fundamentally spiritual adultery. It is exchanging the king who provides everything for false gods that promise pleasure or security, but ultimately deliver nothing but ruin and pain. Christ is the faithful bridegroom and the kinsman redeemer. In the New Testament, he elevates the marriage metaphor. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 through 27 shows that Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her. This kind of mirrors Hosea buying Gomer back from the auction block. Hosea chapter 3, verse 2. But Christ pays the ultimate price, his own blood. Even more, in Matthew 2:15, he quotes Hosea 11:1. He says, out of Egypt I call my son, applying a covenant theme of Israel's past directly to Jesus' life. Christ didn't just endure the betrayal, he absorbed the judgment for spiritual adultery, transforming the covenant curse into eternal fidelity. So we have to live recognizing that our identity is not in our performance, but in our covenant relationship. Living like Christ means demonstrating unwavering covenant loyalty toward those who fail us by reflecting the bridegroom's nature. So the challenge for us is that disposable relationship mentality that our culture champions, that self-actualization above fidelity. So when a relationship, whether that's a marriage, a friendship, a partnership, becomes difficult or demanding or disappointing, that prevailing logic is just cut your losses. You deserve better. This mentality treats people like they're consumable commodities, denying the costly, enduring covenant that God modeled through Hosea. I mean, come on, think about it. We've seen this before time and time again. You may know of a couple that has been through this deep betrayal, and maybe not physical adultery, but adultery like in the emotions, or financial like betrayal. I've heard a story one time of this guy who, he has a family, but he secretly like takes all the family savings that they've been saving for a long time and gambles it off to try and earn more money or win it big so that, he can do something for the family or whatever, but ultimately leaving that family in ruins. And you may think in that moment that the wife is totally justified in leaving him. After all, he ruined the family by blowing the money, by blowing the savings. But as we exemplify that character of Christ, as believers, our job is to demonstrate Christ's character and let that be shown through us. So when you feel justified in abandoning a difficult relationship or something that's not serving you, remember the bridegroom who was infinitely justified in abandoning you, but he chose the cross instead. His love empowers us to practice this covenant, even when it's scandalously unfair. So think about that for a second. Identify maybe the most difficult, draining, or disappointing relationship in your life right now. It could be a friend, a work partner, it could be a spouse, it could be anyone. And maybe you're on the brink of just cutting it off or stopping it. Maybe you need to stop the transactional way of thinking for a second. Engage in the covenant audit. Like for 1 week, intentionally treat that person not based on what they deserve or what they're giving to you, but based on that covenant loyalty that you received from Christ. Pray, asking the bridegroom to empower you to practice that scandalous patience that mirrors his love. And as we move on to the next point, the Israelites believed that their prosperity came from the Canaanite fertility god of Baal, who they worshipped in all these illicit rituals and practices. And Hosea declares that God, the true provider, would tear away their perceived blessings, showing that the gods that they chased were actually empty. So God declares he will expose their spiritual fraud. Hosea 2 verse 9, it says, "Therefore I will take back my grain in its time and my wine in its season, and I'll take away my wool and my flax, which were to cover her nakedness." And the truth in this is the idols that we trust ultimately withhold the very provision and security that they promise to deliver. Jesus Christ is our sovereign provider and the true vine of abundance. When Christ taught it against anxiety, he pointed to the Father as the ultimate provider. In Matthew chapter 6, from verse 25 through 33, directly fulfilled this image of the true spiritual harvest, telling his disciples, "I am the vine and you are the branches." In John 15, pursuit of Baal, false provision, is revealed to be a life without true fruit. Christ is the only source whose sap, the Spirit, produces eternal, unshakable harvest. And honestly, making that pursuit of this fleeting materialism or material security entirely obsolete. We have to live with a faith that God's provision, even when it involves discipline, is always redemptive. Living like him means shifting our focus from the false abundance of the world to the eternal sufficiency of our King. And the modern idolatry is the security mirage. We chase this security through career accumulation, debt management, self-care routines, or even perfect investment portfolios. We treat these systems like Baal, believing that if we worship them, or in other words, dedicate all our time and energy, that they will guarantee a flawless future. Or our spiritual anxiety comes from placing covenant trust in temporary provisions. Think of someone who works so hard their entire life and is completely wrapped up in their career, and all of a sudden they get cut from their job. Imagine that title and salary, that quote unquote wool and flax. When it vanishes, you just realize that everything is bankrupt. Even with a massive 401k, benefits, all that, when it's stripped away, you're forced to confront the true provider. And honestly, the encouragement is that God allows these things that we idolize to fail so that the one thing you can truly trust can be revealed. His purpose in stripping away these false securities is to invite us in to find the true rest in the vine himself, in the one who truly provides. So let's think about that. Identify that source of anxiety or that source that we rely on, and that thing that we're currently worshiping or spending our time and everything in, that we think is guaranteeing our security, our career, financial investments, even our children's perfection. Parents a lot of times brag and are so proud of children. Stop the frantic chasing. Just engage in him. Then name that idol and physically or digitally renounce your covenant trust in it. Pray declaring that you are not my God, you are not my source. My life is hidden in the true vine. Dedicate the time that you used to use chasing that idol to communion with Christ instead. Which leads us to our next point. Despite the relentless condemnation and the imagery of God as the devouring lion in Hosea chapter 5 verse 14, the book concludes with this ultimate promise of unconditional healing and restoration. The final word that we hear is mercy. God promises to not just forgive, but to radically restore the relationship. Hosea chapter 14 verse 4 says, I will heal their apostasy. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned from them. And the truth is, God's love is not conditioned by our ability to return. It is the source of our ability to be restored. Jesus is the healing balm and the risen life. The New Testament gives a lot of weight and credibility to Hosea's promise. Hosea 13:14, which speaks of redeeming Israel from the power of the grave. This is quoted directly by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:55. To declare, it says, O death, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting? This proves Christ's resurrection is the final total fulfillment of God's promise to heal his people from the absolute consequence of sin and death itself. So that means through Christ, the sting is removed, and the full, free, unconditional love that Hosea 14:4 says is poured out by the Holy Spirit. We have to live knowing that our healing is comprehensive. It covers not only sin, but the scars and the spiritual disease it leaves behind. Living like Christ means that we practice this radical acceptance through forgiveness, refusing to carry the shame of these wounds from our past that his Spirit has healed. The trap is always that self-punishment and that chronic shame. You accept Christ's forgiveness for an old failure, but you reserve the right to keep punishing yourself with constant self-condemnation and shame. You look back and say, yeah, I'm healed, but I'm still a fool, or I don't deserve this joy. Why am I feeling joyful? This shame effectively treats Christ's sacrifice insufficient to cover the depth of your personal issue or your infidelity or whatever that thing that grips you is. It's a failure to receive that free love Hosea 14 tells about, that fully removes the anger and the punishment. A lot of times, people who are recovering from alcoholism or drug abuse or some kind of gripping addiction along that path, once they are freed from it, or they're clean and they're living a good life, a lot of times they live, or with that shame of, man, all those bridges I burned in the past. Whether that's like that stealing money to get my next fix, or that borrowing from family and relatives and friends to get my next high or my next drink or whatever. Even after deliverance, it's hard to face the past. It's like accepting the forgiveness, but not really healing. And, we have to remember that promise that said, I will love them freely. Freely means without condition, including the condition of self-doubt or self-condemnation. When we allow shame to swallow us up, we're agreeing with the accuser, not the bridegroom. So, the encouragement is, you're not just forgiven, you're loved freely. Receive that freedom. The healing balm, it covers everything. And sometimes, when we look back, there's always that one thing, that one sin or failure that we know Christ has already forgiven, but we still use some kind of chronic shame or punishment, or we keep reflecting back on that moment, wondering, why did I, how could I, or I just did so much. But we've got to engage in that free love, that declaration, that look at the past failure and declare out loud, I am loved freely. My shame is over because Christ's sacrifice was sufficient. And we have to boldly commit to growing in faith closer to Him. A lot of times, those things that we hold on to keep us from committing to service or leadership or to growth, because we think, how could I step into this? How could I move into this? Holding on to that old shame and that old thing that previously would block us from doing or demonstrating our acceptance of God's complete healing. I want to end with this. The search for Christ in Hosea, for us, it's a call to receive that scandalous love, that undeserved love, because Christ is a faithful bridegroom, and we practice that radical loyal covenant. Because Christ is the true vine, we reject the security mirage that this world tries to offer and renounce our covenant in our trust for idols. And because Christ is the healing balm, we reject that self-punishment and that chronic shame, and we receive His love freely. The King's love isn't a reaction to our faithfulness. It is the cause of it. Rest in the scandal of His redemptive love and His passion. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining us on this episode of Aliens on Earth. And we'll see you next time as we continue our journey in the book of Joel, and we'll discover Christ in the promise of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And until then, you're listening to Aliens on Earth, and I'm your host, Nate Gazal. Peace.